Hi, this is Steve Rigolosi, and today on Forgotten Mysteries, I have for you A Sad Song Singing by Thomas B. Dewey. And this is copyright 1963 by Simon & Schuster, their Inner Sanctum imprint. I don't know if you can see it on the cover. It's kind of dark there. And I have to say, I love these old mystery imprints that really did something to develop and maintain their brand. I mean, we don't really see that many mystery specialists these days. Mysterious Press still is still publishes, but I think mostly works by established writers. There's Minotaur, but I don't know that they, brand their novels the way these old imprints did. And the old imprints did by, saying the name of the imprint pretty, significantly on the cover. And then, there was always the colophon down here. And then they often did something interesting with their end papers, right? This is the Inner Sanctum end paper. And if you read the Harper Novels of Suspense, they've got end papers that just say Harper Novel of Suspense repeated top to bottom throughout the entire end papers. I like that. I love that sort of old school publishing. This book cover actually reminded me, the book and the plot reminded me of another book in a similar vein. My Name is Death by Leslie Egan. Speaking of Harper Novels of Suspense. And here is the end paper, Harper Novels of Suspense. Oh, and you see here is my little index card summarizing my thoughts about the book. Mostly I keep these cards in here so that I don't read the same book twice. I mean, it has happened, but with so many unread books out there, I would really rather not inadvertently read the same book twice. So let's get back to Thomas B. Dewey and A Sad Song Singing. So my opinion is that Thomas B. Dewey is very, very underrated and sadly unacknowledged or underread these days. I don't know many people who read him, which is why I'm very pleased to bring his name to your attention here. He wrote a couple of different series characters. He did some standalones. He started out his career, I believe, by working in advertising before he became a full-time writer and an English professor. So, he's really got the street cred. And this book and his key series character, who stars in this book, just goes by the single name of Mac. That's all you know him as, Mac. And he is basically the hotel detective at a hotel in Chicago, and but also does private detecting on the side. And I kind of get a kick out of his office is that it's just sort of a part of his living space in the hotel. These old-time residential hotels I have a real fascination with. It must have been such a different way of living than the way we do today. I can't quite picture it, although I could imagine the joy of living in a nice space where your home is cleaned for you and you can have food brought up or have your laundry done. I guess kind of like those luxury buildings in New York City or any big city. But they're hotels rather than, condominiums or co-ops or whatever. So the first Dewey book I read, maybe about a year ago, was called Portrait of a Dead Heiress. And here's where I can't always trust my own memory, because I would have sworn that the character of Mac was a black man. I really came away from that book with that impression. It wasn't a big deal or made a big deal of, but I would have sworn on a stack of Bibles that Mac is black. Turns out he's not. There were clues in A Sad Song Singing that he was not, to the point where I said, I've got to go look this up on the web because it's driving me crazy. And wrong, right? I was just so wrong about that. I mean, not that it matters so much, but, I have to ask myself, what was it that made me think of Mac as a black man? I don't know. I just, maybe I was reading late or misconstrued something. I mean, obviously I misconstrued something. But, enough of all this rambling. Let me get on with the book. So, for me, one of the really interesting things about Mac, and you would almost think that this would be uninteresting, but instead it's interesting, is that he has no personal relationships. Like, if you read a book, every protagonist has a spouse, a significant other, is dating someone, has children, has failed relationships, has friends, has a business partner, has someone with whom they interact that sort of shows you a little bit more of who they are. Mac appears to have no human relationships. That doesn't mean that he is a sociopath or that he doesn't like people. He's a retired cop. He has contacts all over the place. They seem to like him. He's a friendly enough guy. He's a moral guy. But yet the author just doesn't give him any sort of backstory. And while on the one hand I find that odd, I also find it distinctive. And I find that there's a benefit in that it keeps the novel so focused on its plot and what it's going on, and what's going on, and the person or persons who have hired Mac and their current situation. It's almost like he subsumes himself into the case that he is working with no personal distractions, and that keeps these books really tightly written and very, very fast to read. I mean, I took 2 nights to read this book, but I could have finished it in 1. And that was true of the other Dewey book that I read. I think these books are pulp fiction in the very best sense of the term. Pulp fiction, kind of gets a bad rap. People look down their nose on it. Even the name of it, conjures up, cheap paper and disposable stories or what have you. But the fact is that a lot of these pulp writers were really good writers. And you notice that as you're reading a book by Dewey, in that he has these sentences that stop you dead in your tracks and make you want to reread them. And I mean, to me, that's really one sign of a good writer. Years ago, back when I was in college, when dinosaurs roamed the earth, the English department would hold a symposium once a semester on some fun topic or topic of interest. And one symposium was called The 99 Best Novels. And the professors got up and talked about their favorite novels. It was a lot of fun. That's where I first heard of Ivy Compton Burnett, who's kind of fun to read. And one professor, June Dwyer, I give you all due credit, June, said in her presentation that for her, one of the marks of good writing is sentences that you want to stop and reread then and there. I never forgot that. I took that forward into my adulthood. And generally, any book that can make me do that is a book I'm going to like. And that's the case here. But it's so much more than that. It's really that the writer tells a good story that follows sort of the conventions of the mystery genre. But as with any good mystery or novel of suspense, he just mixes things up a little bit. He lays down his clues. He introduces a cast that's a reasonable size, that you don't have to scribble down notes to keep track of. And he takes the protagonist and the other characters logically through the book on a very enjoyable ride. So the particular plot of this book is that Mac is hired by a very young woman. I mean, she's basically a kid, 16 or 17. Her boyfriend has disappeared. He is a singer, and an aspiring singer, and he has disappeared but left a suitcase, a locked suitcase in her possession, and asked her to take care of it for him. And when he doesn't come back, she hires Mac because, she's so in love with him. She thinks he's so in love with her. She feels certain that something has happened to him, and she wants to find out. And I have to say, I've always been a sucker for this locked suitcase kind of thing, because the potential is endless. There are so many things that can be in there. The least interesting of which is money, right? I mean, a suitcase full of money, how many times have we seen that trope? But a really creative novelist can come up with some super interesting things to put in an empty suitcase. And Dewey does that here. I'm not going to tell you what's in it. One thing is, I found it a little bit unrealistic that Mac would not insist on opening the suitcase. But on the other hand, he's such a stand-up guy, and the woman who hires him, Crescentia Fanio, she has promised her boyfriend, her beloved, that she will not open this suitcase. And Mac is so respectful of her and her wishes that he doesn't open it, although on many occasions he wants to or is tempted to. So that's a great plot device. And the setting here is one that you don't often see. And it takes place in Chicago, in the city, and then it also takes place in the countryside of Illinois and Indiana. But within the city, and even in some of the outlying areas, there are these places called coffee houses. So we think these days of a coffee house as a place like Starbucks, where you go and get your caffeine injection, buy overpriced food that's not very good, or stale croissants. But there was a different meaning back then in this location, and it was a place really where people just showed up with their guitars or their instruments, and they got a turn to sit or stand on stage and sing their songs. And I guess so in a way it was almost like an open mic night for singers. And several of the singers in this book travel around the country looking for folk songs, the types of songs that maybe your grandmother used to sing to you, or your mother used to sing to you at bedtime, that you couldn't buy on iTunes or Apple Music, but that have a part in our culture that is not particularly well documented. And that was really interesting, seeing people finding these songs, setting them to music, trying to give them the emotional heft that they had. And I just really enjoyed the music setting. I'm a sucker for music, and so books that are set in a musical environment, I tend to be predisposed to liking. And Dewey does it very well. Something else he does well is sort of prescient, I think, in that, I never get into politics on this channel, because who wants that ugliness in their life when they're supposed to be watching or hearing a book review. But I do think that one of the things that really marks U.S. society today is this huge divide between urban dwellers and rural dwellers. I know many people who are devoted city dwellers and would never want to live anywhere else. And I know an equal number of people who live in the exurbs or in rural areas who are blissfully happy there and can't imagine anyone for any reason wanting to live in a city. And you get to see both settings in this book. You get urban Chicago, and then you get the farm country of Illinois and Indiana. And you see that some of those differences that still linger or are very strong today were equally strong back in the 60s. I guess it's just you're urban, you're suburban, you're rural. It's probably just a personality trait, right? I mean, I've never read any psychological research about this. But if you're a psychologist, it sounds like a very fertile topic of research. Is this an inborn preference, or do you develop it through life, nature versus nurture? So within this, brief, tight 180-page book, Dewey is giving you good writing, a likable protagonist, a couple of different settings. He's teaching you about the world of music, and he's giving you a good story with a locked suitcase that you ultimately will discover what is or is not in that suitcase. And you just close the book thinking, I can't wait to read another book by this man. Really, very, very fine. Those who like their fiction literary, who like a large cast, who like, all that kind of stuff, this is not the book for you. But if you like pulpy fiction with all the characteristics that I've described, I really think you will find that you take a shine to Dewey. And his books aren't that hard to find, and they're not that expensive. So all of this is just, I hope, motivating you to go out and explore some Thomas B. Dewey. I've read some criticism, and I think those in the know, I think agree that he is underrated, that he's really, really good, and I can't wait to read more by him. I mean, it probably won't be for another 6 months or a year, because I don't like to read books by the same author back to back. It kind of takes away some of the specialness. But Dewey has entered the same group of writers for me that I know when I've read a couple of bad books and I really desperately need to make sure that the next book I read is good, I have someone to turn to. And another writer who fits in that category for me is Andrew Garve, and I've already posted at least one review of one of his books. So check that out if you are interested. My sole criticism is, and I don't think this is quite fair, so take me with a grain of salt, is that Cress, the girl who hires him, she's a little annoying. She's a little moony, in terms of love and that whole young love shtick. You're like, oh, I love him. He loves me. We're in love forever. Right? Like as if people that age have any idea what love is, like Romeo and Juliet, although not as poetic. And, she's so immature and so idealistic, and sadly, her idealism is, her idealism meets realism or practicality at at some point in this book. So let's just say that that happens. And I also have to give Dewey credit here for making his Mac's relationship with this young woman or girl just avuncular. He just likes her. He wants her to be happy. He's sad about what's happening to her. And he really fathers her in a way that's very sweet. Excuse me. It reminded me of a Clint Eastwood movie I saw with Hilary Swank. I can't remember the name of it. I think it was $1 Million Baby, where, it would be so easy to have made a movie of Clint Eastwood and Hilary Swank, who's, 80 years younger than he is, falling in love and having a torrid affair. But he didn't go there. He made it about Clint caring for Hilary Swank's character as a father, as an uncle, or just as an older person who comes to love her and care about her. And there's something very, very sweet about that. There's so many different types of love. It doesn't always have to be romantic. And that's another thing that this book does well. So clearly I'm gushing. I'm happy to gush here because the last few books that I've read, I've been rather rough on. So all that said, please check out Thomas Dewey. I think you'll be happy if you're a reader like me. And if you do, please leave a note below and let us all know what you think. Thank you and good night.